2216 essentially created the arms embargo around Yemen, and then the Saudi-led coalition essentially enforced that embargo. Except that they went too far. So instead of just saying, okay, we'll stop the ships that we believe are trafficking weapons or whatever, they essentially stopped a lot of humanitarian aid and just stopped them for 4 to 6 months. They didn't submit a single report that they should have, and what this means is that they were abusing their power. They were just, they were just using that to delay the entrance of humanitarian aid into the country. There was no sanctions for that, but what did happen is that the UN created the UNVIM, which is a verification and inspection mechanism. And what they do then is that the Saudi coalition is no longer responsible of the embargo. It is the UN itself. It's an organism based in Djibouti, and they only do this inspection for the shipping that is going to ground control ports, so like the most important landing out data. So anything that is going still to the government control ports, that doesn't have to pass through. That is one of the things that I think was important to mention. If you look UNVIM, their main webpage, at the right side, you'll find a document that essentially explains what their mandate and their responsibilities are. There was something else that I wanted to say. Okay, there was something else. I'll remember later. But it was another thing. So I don't know if you thought a bit about having a more dynamic aesthetic. Think about it throughout the session, how you would want it. Again, it's a very flexible committee, so if throughout tomorrow you decide to change from one side over to the other, or you decide that maybe it's a bit too much or a bit too little, then you can always add more, add less. So yeah, as soon as you start thinking about it, just take a piece of paper, because I don't want to waste time on it later. Take a piece of paper, write your vote, write your country, and just pass it around. Okay? You just pass it around to me. So secret, don't. Yeah. Okay, so I'll remember the other thing that I want to say. We will now move into an informal session. That means that you are free to organize yourself however you want. Personally, I would feel the best way to organize yourself right now would be having a dynamic debate, which means that whoever wants to speak raises their placard. I pick somebody, they speak. I put a time limit of 2 minutes to make sure it's not excessive. Right now, to make it more dynamic, maybe it could be shorter, that's up to you. And then when they're done, I have somebody else speak, unless that person specifically feels the type of questions, or and if you have questions, then you can just ask them part of the debate itself. Does that sound fair? Does everybody agree that right now what we should discuss are the main points of focus for the tomorrow's session, and that we should not go into many, well, not entirely discuss the debate, unless we release the agenda in 1 hour and then we have an extra hour to start getting into that. Okay, so if that seems necessary, that's right, we can start. So, any delegates wish to start by speaking? Delegate of China.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. The delegate of China, first of all, wants to clarify again the 3-step action plan that I introduced earlier on. I mentioned 3 topics. That was fighting famine, seeking ceasefire, and thwart the terror threats. However, these topics, they shouldn't be tackled in a chronological order, but they have to be tackled at once, as they are all connected, and the 3 pillars that are necessary for feasible solution, for a peaceful solution in Yemen. And as they're tackled as once, one point that all delegates here in all countries here agreed on is that we must push cooperation between us and cooperation between the parties involved in Yemen. And as such, China suggests that from now on we first of all focus on who are people and parties being involved in the next, let's call them peace talks, in the next round of negotiating, and what are the core topics. For the first question, China suggests that there's no sense in establishing a new body and calling a new forum, because we have several bodies, persons, and people involved in Yemen already. So China suggests that we do new peace talks under the auspices of the panel of experts on Yemen. Also include the sanction committee of Yemen in the peace talks as well. So somehow it should be moderated by a UN agency, and the panel of experts would be the right body to do so. And which topics China wants to focus on is especially the port of Hodeida. However, this is mainly important to guarantee a flow of, to guarantee the supply chain of humanitarian aid and of any kind of aid and goods to the Yemen civil population. So another point that was mentioned by many people was the transition government. China suggests that we talk about a possible government and a feasible solution for the time after within the end of our session, as all countries on this table acknowledge only one sole legitimate government in Yemen, and therefore a transitional government shouldn't be of our first priority to discuss. Hence again, to summarize, China suggests the panel of experts as, or on the auspices of the panel of experts, to call in this new negotiation round for peace talks, and thinks we should focus on the port of Hodeida, or as the Russian Federation mentioned already, think about a solution of dropping air cargo via air by re-establishing the airport of Sana'a again.
They parted ways, but apparently it wasn't these secret talks. It was changing the way of working and trying to figure out exactly how it worked. But just so you know, possibility for you to continue to talk to another country is possible. It's also possible to continue to talk to one. All right. So any delegate can speak. Russia.
Thank you, Chair. The Russian Federation welcomes the suggestions by the Republic of China, particularly this focus on the convening of peace talks. We find that it is essential, we're in agreement that this should be conducted under a mediator who can gain the trust of both sides. However, we would question whether the panel of experts is the correct choice, given that, although, as the name would suggest, they are experts, they've studied this in detail, they've worked with both sides. The Resolution 2140 also points out that this is a panel of 4 experts. So perhaps it would be a suggestion to include those panel of experts within a larger panel that this council could create. But we just feel it made a bit too much for simply 4 people. Another question that springs to mind is the question of future transitional government that the delegate of China suggested. He rightly mentions that we recognise one sole legitimate authority in Yemen, which is the existing government of President Hadi, but the council will also be aware of a parallel government which has been set up by rebels, Houthi rebels, loyal to former President Saleh. If it's permissible to the chair, would the delegate of China perhaps be able to give the council his thoughts on how that parallel government could be incorporated? Because although it's a challenge to legitimate authority in the country, we also have to accept that it has started to take on a lot of the institutional responsibilities that the central Yemeni government has been unable to exercise given its lack of control over certain territories. So would the delegate of China care to elaborate on that, if not some of the discussion by others?
Yeah, just for that, originally the resolution 2140 did have 4 individuals. Since 14 April 2015, there's an annex and there are 5 individuals. Not that it changes the argument, but there are 5 individuals, and it does reflect that you can have more experts for taking We'll give a chance to respond. You would prepare your answer. Also possible. Thank you. I'm going to share to
the right to reply to the questions of the delegate of the Russian Federation. First of all, we we agree that 5 experts are certainly not enough to solve the conflict. However, we thought about having this under the auspices of the panel of experts. So also including other people, definitely as other people as well, it is necessary. And talking about the transitional government, China just wanted to point out that this that it shouldn't be of our first priority to think of people and person in charge of a new government. However, the delegate of Russia is correct that there should be a solution. There should be at least thought about restructuring and reinstalling the infrastructure and the political infrastructure as it's needed, as the country is divided at the current state. So what China, what I was just saying is we should reinstall the political infrastructure. That's right. However, we don't need to think of a new party that we want to be in power there, as there is a legitimate government that we acknowledge.
Elaborate a bit more on the panel of experts, because that is important. The decision-making of the panel itself is made by consensus. That means that if consensus cannot be reached, the matter may be submitted to the Security Council, or the Security Council, and then the Security Council shall make the decision. So parts of the thing that I meant before by making the council more dynamic and less static would be having something like this introduced tomorrow in the middle of the session. So assume that the panel of experts reached no consensus on one decision and decided to refer it to you, in which case you would have to, abandon the previous talk, focus on that, make a decision on that, take a vote on that, and then go back. So the type of things that I think would make the committee a bit more dynamic. Then again, it's just you to decide if you want to take things or not. So this would be a good example of the type of things that I mean. Okay, any other speakers? Japan.
Thank you, Honorable-Chair. Delegation of Japan thinks that now we see the situation when two sides have misunderstanding. Two sides like government and opposition. And the problem lies is not in a cooperation or transition power. We see that now one side don't respect each other. And in this situation, two sides want to destroy each other. And the main problem is our first resolution when we when one side government make sanctions against Shiites, and we as a global society support these sanctions, and we think that Shiites is the biggest problem of this region. But Shiites and Houthi is one of the minority of this region and of Yemen territory. We think that the solution of this problem is stopping bombing by United States. Well, why we think so? Because when United States make these acts, maybe it help for fighting against terrorism and ISIS. But Saudi Arabistan, Egypt, Turkey understand and see support from United States as an effort to fight against Shiites. And now we have situation when the port of Hodeidah, and when Saudi Arabistan won't fight against Shiites and destroy it. We haven't any negotiations, and we can't reach any negotiation with these minorities, because we must understand the history of this conflict. The history of this conflict start not yesterday. This conflict start 10, 20 years ago. And this is not war between Shiites and Sunnis. This is a war of not representatives of some opinions of some people who want lead this country. And we think that only a peaceful solution can help to solve this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Distinguished delegates, so talking about the new government and guaranteeing the legitimate government of Hadis to take the power in Yemen, you know, as United Nations passed 3 times resolutions against self-announced government, warning the Houthis, but Houthis made sure that they won't give up. They won't give up, then there's no consensus for them. And simply saying that we need to get rid of them. We need to get rid of Houthis in order to guarantee the government back to the Hadi. That's simple. And therefore, there's no way for one side power, getting the power and getting the government back to the Hadi. So if we want to organize the platform for negotiations, even so Sweden do not believe to the productivity of these negotiations, we need carefully think about the format of negotiations so that Houthis, we're not talking about just a political party, we're talking about the group which is under the ideology and they won't give up or compromise on their ideology. We should understand this. We should carefully work on the format of negotiations so that they will come up with some kind of consensus, some kind of compromise. Then, since the 5th expert within the panel is the expert who specializes in arms embargo, and as it was mentioned within the panel identifies the increased use by the Houthis of battle-winning weapons, such as anti-tank guided missiles that were not in the pre-conflict Yemeni stockpile. The missiles were shipped over land along from the border with Oman. So we could think of strengthening the border and the route that they use to supply to get these battle-winning weapons, special missiles. So we should also think about the strengthening the border, and since the Oman is not being able to sustain its border and to go against this route by itself. Thank you.
Thank you.
When say that we didn't wait for project negotiation, no, we didn't say about this. We say that we must do anything for make this negotiation protected. We say that negotiation.
When you ask for action plan, you just basically explain very briefly what it is, and then if I accept it, you can go on. In this case, I won't accept it as the right to reply, as I don't think it was consulted. However, I will grant you the word and then anything else, so I can clarify your thoughts.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So, as we heard now also by several delegates, last mentioned by the delegate of Japan, also that the Saudi-led coalition should stop the bombings of Houthi forces. But at the same time, I want to emphasize that before that step can be taken, we have to ensure that also Saudi Arabia can be sure that no more Houthi forces are attacking actually Saudi Arabia. And like France, the delegate of France also mentioned, the weapon arsenal actually of the Houthi forces increased very much since the beginning of the conflict. And therefore, I think we have here a very concerning issue. We have to make sure that the Houthi forces don't get supplied anymore with these, like you also named it, battle-winning weapons or also like mid-range missiles. And therefore, I think not just by securing even more the border to Oman, also to enlarge the national or multinational naval partnership or combined maritime forces to secure like the high seas of the coast of Yemen has to be taken into account to make sure that no more weapons get shipped into Yemen, which are intended for Houthi forces or their associates, but just like in accordance with the panel of experts, which was also mentioned, and also like the British expert in that panel on the weapon embargo mentioned, also should be these weapons should be solely for the legitimate government of Yemen. Thank you.
There was some any work. The microphones don't work.
It works. Yeah. Is the screen on or is it off?
Yeah. Thank you. There was some miscommunication between us, delegation of Sweden, and between delegation of France. We didn't say that we didn't believe for negotiations that be productive. We say that negotiations in Astana was productive, but it didn't give some results for us. That's why we must do negotiations. Of course, we promotion this, but we must make all things to make these negotiations productive.
Just to clarify, the peace talks broke out on the 6th of August last year. Why? Because the Houthi rebels, well, Saleh reorganized his government, and that essentially led to a breakdown of the peace talks. Even though they were theoretically just suspended, they are still not active again. But 3 weeks ago, the Prime Minister of Yemen, or President, I think it's Prime Minister of Yemen said that he is willing to have the talks again, but it is the Houthis that seem to not want to have the talks again. So one of the main ways you should phrase it is not do we want peace talks to happen again, it's rather how do we get the Houthis back to the negotiation table? I think that's the real question here, given that 3 weeks ago the government actually expressed its silence. Any further speakers? China?
Yeah, thank you, Honorable Chair. And while China agrees that it's important to look back in conflicts like this, to look back at the history and the involvement of the conflict, this is not how we can solve the current situation, especially this is not how we can solve the humanitarian crisis. For this, we don't need to look at the history of the conflict, but rather look in the future. And China would just remind the delegate of France that just because we adopted 3 resolutions in which we claimed that the Houthi government is not the legitimate government, this is not a sign of inefficiency, but rather it just shows how certain we are on that and how important it is to make this an issue that we mention again and again. An issue that has been now mentioned several times was the arms embargo, the supply of arms to Houthi rebels, and the need to fly again airstrikes by the Saudi-led coalition. And China, which is not a member of the Saudi-led coalition, is not a member for a reason, because we believe that true stability and a good solution comes from within the country. That's why we also call for the peace talks. There might be also a coincidence why there is an increase, or it might not be a coincidence why there is an increase of the weapon arsenal of the Houthi rebels, while the airstrikes flown by Saudi and American air forces also increased. So what we think how we can also solve the arms problem is to call for an immediate ceasefire, and the ceasefire is something that should be negotiated in our new forum during those peace talks. It is good if we have an arms embargo, and it would be better if it works completely. However, we just see in the conflict in Yemen, we also see it in other conflicts, that there will never be a complete stop of weapon supply. If we don't have the chance to stop the weapons coming in the country, we just can at least try to make sure that they don't get used, and this would be with another call for a ceasefire. Coming back to the original topic for this informal session, China wants to stress out that we need to focus on the port of Hodeidah and thinks that besides a general ceasefire that would be really beneficial, we should try to find a way to probably agree on a neutral zone or on a shared management zone in the port of Hodeidah to guarantee the supply of humanitarian aid to the Yemeni civil population, as this is actually also in the interest of the Houthi government, of the Houthi rebels, that at least the Yemen population gets their supply. We need to make sure that this happens quickly, that this happens without smuggling weapons at the same time, and that the Yemen government, that the Yemen population doesn't suffer from it, as there are stories about a war tax being imposed on humanitarian aid. But if we find a solution for that, we can at least prevent the humanitarian crisis from worsening even more.
Testing 1, 2. Excellent. We've spoken of the need to bring the Houthis back to the table, and we've also talked about the need to end Saudi airstrikes. What the Russian Federation would submit is that the threat of annihilation is not conducive to cooperation, it's conducive to fighting for your survival. Hence, our submission that in order to encourage the goodwill of the Houthis, in order to get them to sit around the table again, a coalition led by Saudi Arabia ought to cease immediately its airstrikes in Yemen, as is the opinion that has been expressed by this council on several occasions in several resolutions. For all the talk of violations of arms embargoes by the Houthis, it is not entirely difficult to understand why those arms embargoes may be being violated when Saudi Arabia itself, and I say Saudi Arabia without meaning to point fingers at specific countries, but the coalition that Saudi Arabia has come to encompass, including Jordan and Morocco and Senegal, and I might add with US purchased weapons. The point is that if Saudi Arabia, other countries feel that they can act with impunity and go against the will expressed by this council in its resolutions, then it's not entirely difficult to understand that the Houthis would themselves feel they can not comply with our resolutions. So there's a need here for, I could phrase it as a gesture of goodwill from external parties to the conflict in order to encourage cooperation from those parties internal to the conflict. On the question of the ports, as referred to by the delegate from the People's Republic of China, in my opening speech, I did suggest the deployment of a peacekeeping or a military force to those ports and indeed to the airport in Sana'a to ensure the continued delivery and indeed more efficient delivery of humanitarian aid. That is something we will be willing to discuss about. And as I've said in the past, as a neutral party in this conflict and as a country which has demonstrated in many parts of the world its commitment to the continued sovereignty of many nations, we would submit that a Russian military force could be seen as a neutral force on the ground to secure those important, those vital arteries for humanitarian assistance. Thank you.
Any delegate speak to get your placards? And see them. And get the mic.
Oh, yes. Got the very wrong.
Thank you, and thank you to the delegate of Russia for his insights on that topic. I agree that, of course, the bombings by the Saudi-led coalition have to stop as soon as possible. But while no military operations go without risk, in particular in dense urban environments, the coalition still continues to take steps necessary to minimize civilian casualties. But at the same time, if we want the coalition to agree to stop of the bombardments, we also have to guarantee to Saudi Arabia that no more attacks by Houthi rebels will take place on their territory. And therefore, we also have to talk about that issue. Also, when we talk about a ceasefire, it's important to remember which forces we shall include or which parties. I think we all agree that it is necessary that the Houthi forces as well as the legitimate government has to be included. But then it will be even difficult. It will be difficult to include the Saudi Arabian government, and even more difficult how to agree how to procedure with other armed groups inside of Yemen, like Al Qaeda or the IS, if they are also like intervening, and they could pose a threat to a ceasefire by attacking forces of either side. Therefore, that's another topic I would like to raise. And when it comes to the ports, I think it is much more realistic to come to a conclusion for the ports now than to get in the first place Saudi Arabia to stop the bombings, because that would need a guarantee that there are no more attacks, like I mentioned. On the other hand, I am sure that we could easily or more easily agree on a solution for the port as a possible demilitarized zone. On the other hand, I disagree that maybe Russian forces would be the best solution on the ground here. I much more propose that forces by the United Nations peacekeeping corps would be a more appropriate idea. Thank you.
Delegation of Japan thinks that we can't. When we say about guarantee to Saudi Arabistan, we make one mistake, because Saudi Arabistan make a decision to involve in this conflict and to support Yemen government. But in this case, we see that people of Yemen think that this is an intervention of their lands, and also they have a reflection to these acts. And as global society, we support only one side, and we don't count another side as Shiites and another side as minorities. We think that good decision in this case not to support one side in these negotiations or in this conflict, because when we support only Saudi Arabistan, only we say that Saudi Arabistan haven't guarantee to security their lands, we make a big mistake. And in this case, Saudi Arabistan and another countries in coalition understand the risks of involving in this conflict, and we must stop bombing by this Saudi Arabistan, and maybe we haven't a reflection by Houthis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So going back to the question of political transition, the government of the United States want to remind that Yemen crisis is a very complicated one. And as I mentioned before, it's not only the confrontation between internationally recognized Hadi government and alliance between Houthis and former President Saleh, but also this is a confrontation among numerous groups of militaries that actually sometimes have conflicting aims and goals between each other. And therefore, would like to stress that when talking about Yemen political transition, we in no way support those self-proclaimed entities, but rather talk about the change within the Hadi government's change within the Hadi government, and also there were actually promising perspectives of political transition when going back to 2012, when President Saleh was forced to leave his position and give this presidential position to Hadi. However, with the help of the international community, they agreed that basically Hadi was supposed to stay in power for 2 years, and that they're going to be the transition of government, and they even drafted a new constitution, and basically Houthis and the government of Hadi agreed to this, but when the Houthis realized that new government means federal government, they basically stepped back. So therefore, the United States considered that one reason for why Houthis government is not compromising is that they disagree with the view of the transitional government, and basically they are opposed to federal transition, and therefore it is one of the things that we have to address here in the Security Council, how to make all the parties be actively engaged in the peace talks, so to satisfy everyone's probably demands or desires in adequate manner, of course. And the United States highly appreciates the remark made by the Russian Federation about Saudi Arabia and the weapons purchased from the United States. However, I want to say that basically it's not the matter of what weapons and from where they're bought, but it's matter to what purposes they're bought. So basically, we consider that we highly condemn Saudi Arabia's military strikes, and we hope that those resources that they get, we think that those resources go for combating terrorists and probably also combating Houthis, but causing minimal hurts to civilians. And moreover, we're highly, as we mentioned before, concerned by the status of Hodeidah port, and consider that military strikes should be made there, and humanitarian assistance should be increased. What else? Yeah, basically that's it. Thank you.
For that, going back into what I meant by dynamic council, if you want to make, for example, a deal in a sense, let's switch to another situation, so I don't give away yet. But if you want to say, for example, end of the Second World War, say, okay, we're going to try to use Strasbourg in exchange for having, I don't know, Czech Republic access to the sea somehow, like Italy. If you wanted to do something like that, you could propose it, and part of what I meant by dynamic is that I could simulate a response to the government, and then you can know if you can move ahead with that, do it or not, right? I will try to be somewhat realistic while at the same time being a bit flexible, because if it was easy to reach an agreement, we would have discussed this for years of warfare. But yeah, this could be what I meant again by dynamic. So you want to make an agreement or a deal that would need to be effective immediately as I don't know, like as was proposed, ceasefire from Saudi Arabia, and that would have to be effective immediately. Otherwise, Saudi wouldn't stop. That could potentially happen if the deal is something that I, as a chair, would say, okay, it's probably not happening. So before the end of the committee, we think that these are the things that I believe would make the committee a bit much more interactive tomorrow. Of course, you can also stick to the standard format of just having a resolution.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, and thanks to the delegate of the United States of America for this. deep insight into the history and the involved parties of the Yemeni civil war. However, the delegate of China is a little bit concerned whether all parties on this table same view on the current military intervention as they're practiced in Yemen. First of all, not all airstrikes are led by Saudi forces, but also by United States forces. So it comes with kind of a surprise that the United States condemns its own airstrikes. And on the other side, the delegate of the United Kingdom announced that these missions are also about minimizing risks and taking a lot of risks. And China thinks that there is not that much of taking a risk with flying airstrikes, bombing cities, killing civilians, and without having a single soldier set his feet on this on the land. So far, the forces of the Saudi-led coalition haven't suffered severe casualties, but the casualties amongst civilians are far more concerning. However, we don't want to count the parties involved, but we don't want to count soldiers being involved here, but we want to install peace in the Yemen civil war. And for this, as there are two different topics we are discussing here at the moment, we first have a little bit of a chicken-egg situation. Who needs to stop first? Is it first opening the peace talks or first stopping bombing the cities? There's the not first opening the peace talks, it's first stopping the arms embargo. We have the other thing, the other topic, which is starting with peace talks and establishing a table to get together, a possibility to negotiate possible ceasefires and a possible solution. As the delegate of China recalls, but can't name now precisely, I think there was a situation where actually a representative of the Houthi rebels was invited for peace talks, and then just a short time before the peace talks starts, sort of said he won't attend. So if it's either possible by the chair to provide information on that, or if the delegate of China is allowed to do some research on it, this might be beneficial, because there was another situation for peace talks which could have taken place, however, didn't take place to a certain reason that I can't state at the camera at the moment. There was a situation, there were peace talks, or the peace talks announced, and I guess it was a meeting between the special envoy of the United Nations and also including a representative of the Houthi rebels. And for some reason, this negotiation didn't take place. So it would be interesting to know more about it, because I think that the reasons for current peace talks being suspended, or that they didn't take place at all, if we tackle the issues there, we can finally find a solution to get peace talks going again, and to find a diplomatic solution, as the diplomatic solution is the one we in the Security Council should seek for, and not one including more airstrikes.
It works first time. Thank you. The delegate of the Russian Federation welcomes the comments of the delegate of the People's Republic of China, particularly regarding the inherent flaws in the argument proposed by the United States in recent times. I would add to my colleagues' criticism of that argument that in the past there have been instances where strikes have been launched on Yemen by US Navy ships positioned in the region as well. The point that was made by the delegate of the United States was that the arms deals that have been agreed between her country and Saudi Arabia have been done so on the assumption that they would be used against terrorists. This is quite an honorable assumption to have, that you would expect trust between partners for international peace. However, with respect, if there's evidence, undeniable evidence, which the panel of experts' final report in January points to and I can quote it verbatim, Saudi-led airstrikes have been devastating to civilians and infrastructure in Yemen, but have failed to dent the Houthis' political will. In the face of this evidence from the panel of experts appointed by this council, is it not the case that the evidence is overwhelming that the Saudi airstrikes have been devastating to civilians and infrastructure? Spring to mind, I haven't got them in front of me, but it was something like 2/3 of deaths in Yemen at the beginning of this year were the result of, by civilians, were the result of Saudi-led airstrikes. So, with respect, without the weapons being provided in the first place, these deaths cannot occur. So we would just submit that the idea that stopping Saudi airstrikes will somehow not help the situation does not appear to sit well with my thinking. Building on the point that the chair has suggested, would it not be perhaps a feasible solution that in return for guaranteed access by humanitarian groups to the airport at Sana'a and to various ports controlled by the Houthi rebels, in return for that, could the Saudi airstrikes be ceased or perhaps toned down somewhat as a gesture of goodwill?
However, it is in October that Saudi himself actually said that any talks or negotiations by Yemeni delegates must be the condition that the United Nations offers a written and comprehensive peace plan. If the proposal does not include an agreement on the new presidential institution, then the UN peace plan becomes merely a partial and incomplete vision, which cannot be a foundation for discussion. You can take whatever agreement on the presidential institution means however you want. Coming out of solid support probably means you make a president or you're not talking. But feel free to take that however you want. Delegate, can you speak then?
Delegation of Japan thinks about political transition, and we think that problem lies also when we when we watch this situation, we don't see any strong person, any strong figure in this situation. Hadi is ex-president and Saleh is ex-president, and they want only own interests in this situation. We think that now, when we support these figures or these persons, we don't solve this problem. We think that the main problem lies not in a Saleh or Hadi, because for example, Houthis support Saleh because their interests are not representatives in new plan of global society. Also, the problem lies in not in the Houthis want only power in this region. Houthis want only have opinion and be representatives of Yemen. And if we give this suggestion, if we give this plan for Houthis, they not be supported by Saleh or not support Saleh because they have own interests. And in this situation, they with Saleh because we support Hadi. And we think that when currently president is weak, when situation is not sustainable, we must make negotiations or only with actors who involved in these conflicts, not ex-presidents, not ex-leaders, who now who want constructive dialogue and who want to make a good decision. When we make these negotiations, we haven't any radical reflections by these sides. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chair of Security Council and distinguished delegates. The France thinks that discussing the political internal issue within this council in today's meeting wouldn't solve and make any efforts towards the progress within the political situation in Yemen, because two parties by themselves need to negotiate. We can make only the platform. We can accurately design the format of negotiations so that they come up with some kind of consensus, and that consensus will, at the end of the day, result on battling and battling the humanitarian crisis that is take place in Yemen. We also need to accent more on being able to build a humanitarian corridor. Even so, we are sending humanitarian aid to Yemen. We are failing to provide that aid to the vulnerable population, and we need to make sure that the port Al Hudaydah is the safest place where we could send our humanitarian aid, and less people suffer because of this war, because of the battle between these parties. But again, France believes that Security Council is not able to solve the problem. What the Houthis want, or the Hadis pretend as a president, but what we can do is to organize a proper platform with the accurate format. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The delegation of the United States appreciate comments made by the Russian Federation, and indeed we consider that we have much in common. Just as Russia provide help and support to the Syrian government for exclusively good intentions in Syrian crisis, so does US in the Yemen crisis. And moreover, one should not also overlook the damage made by Houthis to the Saudi Arabia, as there were several cases of bombings made by Houthis to the territory of Saudi Arabia. And as a country that is willing to protect its sovereignty and borders, of course, one can understand the actions initiated by it, because these damages caused by Houthis not only undermine, cause physical damage in terms of infrastructure and so on. However, also it undermines people's belief in the government who's able to protect them. When talking about the cessation of arms and so on, we should also make sure that the Houthis also make commitments. In other words, when stopping to probably when reducing weaponry and other military stuff, we also should should be sure that Houthis are not getting any support too. However, as was indicated by the UN observations, there were actually different weaponry of Houthis that were manufactured in Iran, and there were some assumptions of Iranian support for the Houthis. For Houthis. So therefore, in other words, it's not one side commitment by the two sides. So we should also take this into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. So when we are talking also about the possibilities of a transitional government, I would at that point also like to point out especially to the outspread of disease, which I mentioned earlier. Like I said, it could happen that in half a year, more than 300,000 people are getting infected by cholera in Yemen. Therefore, I think we should very much focus in the first place on humanitarian aid and access. And already mentioned port of Hudaydah, which is currently under control of Houthi forces, would be an appropriate place to start. Therefore, I would propose to declare the port of Hudaydah as a demilitarized zone, which then also means that Houthi forces have to redraw. But on the other hand, there could be a guarantee for Houthi forces that all other involved parties, also including the Saudi-led coalition, respect a humanitarian corridor which would ensure that civilians also in the Houthi areas, especially Sana'a, where the situation is worst right now, that these civilians get provided with the necessary humanitarian goods as soon as possible.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. While China welcomes the suggestion of the delegate of the United Kingdom to declare the Port of Hodeidah as a non-armed zone, as a conflict-free zone, however, declaring area that has been fought for is for a long time is it's not enough. Simply, we can declare also whole Yemen a conflict-free zone, that won't solve the problem with it. What we need to find is a way to actually enforce this weapon-free zone, this conflict-free zone for the Port of Hodeidah. And to do so, just China repeats that it thinks it's important to stop the airstrikes and the bombing of, especially of the civil population of Yemen. And this also regarding the ongoing humanitarian crisis and the threat of the diseases, as the last pieces of infrastructure that are left in Yemen get destroyed with every new airstrike. China wants to recall what has been said by the delegate of Japan, if I'm not wrong, that it is less about the single persons or single individuals, but about the different parties. And while it's important to have not a certain representative of each party and of each player involved, it's important to have at least someone from there or a group of them involved. And China suggests that now that we are talking about a transitional government as well, that a similar solution has been found in, has been enforced in Libya after the conflict, that a new political body has been established, which includes people from all group of interest, just for the transitional government, not for the legitimate government that should be established at the end, but that the establishment of a body which is somehow consulting the government and includes representatives of all different conflict zones. And it is important to differentiate between those who between those who disagree politically and fundamentalists and terrorists. So some delegates mentioned that also ACAP and ISIL are important players in Yemen, and it's unfortunately this is the case. However, China stresses that we do not negotiate with terrorists and that we do not open the floor or the peace talks with terrorists on the table as well. So China's suggestion is to open or to call for a house or a forum of the different parties involved in the Yemeni conflict, and that those find a viable political solution for the country itself from within, and not having a government being enforced by the global coalition, as this has not been successful in other places in the Middle East as well.
Delegation of Japan, in conclude of all speeches in this debate, we think that now we have two visions. We have reality status quo when the conflict in Yemen continue. And we think that now we have two visions. One, the sovereign of this country, independence of this country. What does it mean? What does it mean? Don't forget that Saudi Arabistan afraid of losing their interest in this country when was some conflicts in Yemen and involved to this conflict. Saudi Arabistan have own interests, and also we must understand this when Saudi Arabistan won't solve some problem in Yemen. And we have two sides, Iran and Saudi Arabistan. And this conflict continue when sovereign of this country don't keep. Another vision, when we as UN send peacekeepers to this zone, because now we have a conflict in Yemen and these sites, and we have civil war. Also, our peacekeepers who don't support any sides can involve for stopping civil war and can provide food, products, humanitarian assistance. We think that now we must give a decision what choice we must to do. We have one vision, and we understand that status quo, when Saudi Arabia and other countries involved in this conflict and all civilians die, is continue, and we can't make any negotiations platform or another platform forum when one side still have some interests in this region.
I'll just shout. Is it still working? Yeah, I was just laughing optimism how long it worked. Thank you. Without wishing to make this a ping pong, Mr. Chair, between the Russian Federation and the United States, we would just like to clarify that recent action by the Russian Federation in Syria is at the invitation of the legitimate government of Syria. It is against terrorist groups that have infiltrated the so-called opposition to the Assad government, and our strikes are in support of a government which is actively taking the fight to ISIL in their country. On a second point, the proposals of the United Kingdom, we are in agreement. We feel we can find some form of arrangement around a demilitarized zone in the port city of Al Hudaydah. We think that the United Kingdom's suggestion of a de-escalation in coalition airstrikes against the Houthis could be in that situation, but we would also note the suggestion by China that zone in itself is not an adequate solution. So we would just draw the Council's attention to the conclusion of the panel of experts in January in their most recent report, that a continuation and indeed extension where necessary of sanctions is also a viable option in this case to use his hand in many ways. So we would welcome further discussions to I've been guilty of it myself, to kind of widen the discussion so far, but perhaps a more narrow discussion on a demilitarized zone in Al Hudaydah would be in order, if other delegates were to have suggestions on that front.
Before we go on, I want to say something that haven't been mentioned I think are very important. So one of them, for example, would be that ACAP currently controls about 36% of the country. That is territory amongst the Houthis and North Hadi. So there could be possibly an agreement that peacemaking operation takes place there with support of the international coalition while the government itself has, for example, an approach. But again, we want to limit it. But another thing that has been mentioned is that one of the main reasons of this conflict was that after the Houthis took power and installed Hadi as president in a way, this alliance broke out is because Hadi then insisted on enforcing federalism in the country. And that is essentially the main reason that everything just went, this all went wrong. Because federalism that was opposed by the Houthis, and the reason that the Houthis opposed it was never really stated by them, but according to analysts, it would be that the northwest of Yemen, which is kind of where the Houthis are based, would be one region in itself, and this region has very scarce resources. So it means that over time, there would be a lot less funding from the central government, and essentially we grow much poorer. Another part of that is that's important is that the south, if you call it history of Yemen, is that the south and the north were divided until 1990, and that there was a lot of division because of that. And right now, if you look at the borders of the front lines between both the Houthi and Hadi, resembles pretty much the same front line. So there's many talks about the country just fragmenting again because no agreement is being reached. So you also have to see that Hadi right now is currently being supported by the separatists movement in the south. And I'm not really sure what if Hadi is somehow reinstated as the main government, I'm pretty sure that this help from the separatist movement is not free. And therefore, you can also try to see how to work with that. And finally, we have cities that are on the front lines, such as Taiz, Mocha, and so on, which are really, really important cities because they're the front lines. Most of the fighting is therefore fighting there. Taiz used to be the cultural capital of Yemen, people academics, research, and so on. Now it's Warsaw, swamping by all parts, and I highly doubt that the Houthis would ever yield control on the data, but it is maybe possible that these cities that are on the border could maybe reach some consensus there. So that's other things that we maybe want to focus on, these states that are literally in the front lines, rather than cities that are under control of one side. States control one side, there's probably not going to be yielded to the UN because then they really don't have that much leverage anymore. They lose a lot of leverage. So yeah, these are some things that I think should also be included in the debate besides what said earlier. Again, it's up to you. You can take the suggestions, you can ignore them, you can take other points that I didn't mention here that I would also find acceptable. I mean, there's many things that I would talk about if I were in your position. It's just that these are the ones that I did think about for a while. I think that they are interesting points. So we have 20 minutes more. I don't expect you to include these points into the conversation now because maybe the reason they haven't been included is because we haven't fully researched them. So 20 minutes, I would suggest that we go again one more time. Everybody's speaking on the conclusions that we have had in the last hour. So essentially, we'll chart the main points that they have identified, and then we can just call it a day. And then so Olivia, I think, first starting tomorrow. Yeah.
Would it be possible for this committee to also elaborate something tomorrow, saying that you're working paper, even though this is not real and you're having
yeah, they'll secretary.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll do another thing. Do you all have Facebook? I'll make it an unofficial Facebook group, and then you can share whatever you want there. Oh wait, you can't use computers. Oh no, wait, you can use computers. And then I never distributed any working papers. You just have to share them yourself. Right? Okay, so we'll do that. I'll send you the link to the Facebook group by email later today. And then yeah, you can have a working paper, you can use it just to submit some causes there directly. But I don't think it should be a problem. I will paper.
You may need to gather all ideas and so
all right, then we will start in the opposite order this time actually. So we'll say, let's keep it because we are 11 people and we have 15 minutes. Let's keep it at 1 minute per person. I will knock when there's 10 seconds left. Russia. So when you have 10 seconds left or not, I won't enforce it 1 minute, but we are start to finish now. Yeah.
Honorable Chair, dear delegates, thank you for the fruitful negotiation that we had today, and hopefully in 2 days we also will be able to come up with an effective resolution. So for now, we understand that humanitarian crisis is one of the most important aspects that we need to emphasize on, and humanitarian assistance is our main priority. Moreover, particularly we should secure the Port Hadida, which basically is a main channel through which people who are suffering can get humanitarian assistance. Then also we should emphasize the question of renewing the peace talks, basically dealing with the political also the question of political transition and its draft constitution that emphasizes federalism as a main point. So it's measures that we have to work on too. And probably another issue that we have to emphasize during tomorrow's negotiation is the demilitarization.
Thank you. So, as the delegate of the USA already mentioned, I think most importantly is that we come to a conclusion how to resolve the humanitarian crisis as soon as possible. Therefore, as we already mentioned, we need to have access for humanitarian organizations in Yemen, secured access, therefore also find a solution for especially the port of Hodeidah. And on the same time here find guarantees for the Houthi as well as Saudi Arabia to ensure that these parties don't get attacked by each other anymore. And then as a further step, it is important to re-establish peace talks, which also include, from my point of view, Saudi Arabia, and then see if we can come to a transitional government. But that, from the point of view of the United Kingdom, would take more time. Now it seems to be more urgent to guarantee humanitarian access as soon as possible.
Thank you, distinguished delegates and the Honorable Chair. The delegate of Ukraine would like to mention as the delegate of the United States and delegate of United Kingdom already mentioned about the first priority should be the humanitarian access and the humanitarian aid and the financial crisis, and Saudi Arabia the bombing, and there should be the delegate of Ukraine want to make point that it should be, we should make more focus on the basis of security as well to against the ISIS and Al Qaeda and all those terrorist organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay. Delegation of Sweden hopes that for a good ending of this crisis, and thinks that we have next steps. First step is the established relations between two sides. And of course, we must consider the opinion of another minorities in this conflict. And of course, the main thing of this crisis is the humanitarian aid, and secondly is that negotiations that can help for us to leave this crisis, and yes, and after that we can do something productive for against ISIS and Al Qaeda. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. An encouraging aspect to these discussions we've had today is that we appear to be in agreement on the solutions, on the aims of this council in Yemen. My colleagues to the left of me have all expressed an interest in providing extra humanitarian assistance to the people of Yemen whose plight worries us all. There's also been talk on the need to establish peace and security in line with the main purpose of this council's existence. The disagreement, however, is how we get there. So the Russian Federation looks forward to working with the rest of the council on the common goals that we seek together, and to fruitful discussion tomorrow on how we tangibly reach those goals. Thank you.
Honorable Chair, dear delegates, to make any resolution, we should take into account that the Constitution of Yemen Republic defines Republic as an independent and sovereign Islamic country and establishes Islamic law as a basic of all laws. So, in order to make a resolution, we should firstly talk between two parties, and then as an international cooperation, we should help them with monitoring and peace talks.
I will count anybody that doesn't submit an extension. So right now there's a unanimous victory for one side. I'll give you 1 minute to go on.
Secret ballot.
Point of 2025.
Yes, so order.
If it's possible, could you, could the chair clarify one more time so we make sure that the main difference between the dynamic and static, we assume that to make
Yeah. So just to clarify what I mean by dynamic. So what you're saying right now, for example, is what I propose, for example, is federalism, right? One of the main arguments, the reasons that people believe in not having against federalism is that the Northwest province will take control. It has very few resources, and therefore, over time, and being separated from the central government, it will become poorer. Now, a way to convince, for example, this region to accept federalism would be if two countries here bilaterally proposed an investment, for example, into industry. That would secure, for example, some sort of independence and long term for it, and then therefore they would follow federalism. If that is the case, then I would allow, for example, something like that to happen here, and therefore accept that a draft resolution included the federalization of Yemen in the long term. Whereas if it's static, I cannot guarantee you in this event that they would accept such a rule, and therefore the warfare will continue. Another example is that the panel of sanctions is controlled by 5 members, 3 of which are members of this council right now: Japan, USA, UK. The other 2 being Morocco and Sri Lanka. So I could, for example, the panel of sanctions could, for example, intend to impose an arms embargo to the Southern movement, which is currently a coalition with Mali. Clearly, the USA and the UK would be against that. However, the Japan position is less ambiguous. So to keep it realistic, I would say that these 2 would still be against that embargo, but the delegate, the member of Japan, is not. And therefore, since that panel of sanctions, that panel of experts cannot reach a consensus, which is the way it's supposed to work, they would defer the question here. And therefore, during maybe a half-an-hour session of informal talk, you would discuss whether to approve such an embargo or not. Right? So it would be dynamic in that case. Static, the most you could do is ask a panel of experts to do something like that. And then that would be a clause and you could vote on it. Dynamic would mean that you would actually take a decision immediately, it would be voted, you would pass the paper immediately. It could also be in the form of small crisis, or it could also be, for example, in, I don't know, ACAP immediately starting an offensive, and you could immediately start a peacekeeping operation, or authorizing the Houthis, or removing the option back to the Houthis to allow them to fight against ACAP, for example, because I'm pretty sure all nations here agree that Houthis are better off than ACAP. So this is what I mean by dynamic, having much more feedback from the real world in a way, instead of the static in which the real world seems permanent, and you can only work with facts of logic. Is that clear? So again, the reason I don't want to do it like immediately is because it may get too complicated, it may require a lot of control if somebody decides that their options are now in use, and they decide, okay, now we're going to use Yemen, and then there's no problem if they don't have these. So I don't want that to happen. So that's why I want to make sure that it's understood what it means. So, all right. Any more questions? Oh, more papers. If you haven't submitted your papers yet, just do it at the end so that we can continue with the talks. So, until I get up to 10, have the floor.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. In conclusion of this session, we understand that we must provide humanitarian assistance, but it's not a solution of main problem. Global security must stop support one side of this conflict, especially Saudi Arabia, because they have own interests in this region and don't worry about civilians when bomb this territory. We don't see any strong figure in this region. Presidents like Hadi and Saleh haven't totally supported by Yemen citizens and want to destroy each other. We must keep independence of country and accept their choice. Also, we must think about another region and about sending UN peacekeeper to this territory for stopping civil war. All minorities and groups must be important for us, and if we count interests of Houthi in time, maybe we haven't currently situation. Japan, for a peaceful decision, and please remind, negotiations starts when we keep neutrality. Thank you.
Honorable delegates, thank you. So many ideas today. So we need to, we need to come up with the real resolutions, with the real solutions of this issue. So how we can help Yemeni people? We need to organize, of course, peaceful talks, and we need to carry on productivity of these talks, as delegate of Sweden mentioned. So international community have to prevent any further violence of civilians. First of all, it have to our first task. It will be our first task to stop the violence of the civilians. And of course, we need to help by the financial aid to Yemen government. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, so distinguished delegates, and since there are roughly two countries, one self-announced and the second legitimate government, and the civilians in both of these countries, so-called countries, are in need of humanitarian aid. France was thinking about maybe creating two humanitarian corridors for two separate territories to improve and ease reaching targeted population that we're talking about. But the question is it realistic and is it efficient actually and possible in our case? And of course, France urges to think about the reopening negotiations during tomorrow's sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, and thank you, fellow delegates, for the statements given so far. Japan said earlier on that we face a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and while the involvement of Saudi Arabia is obvious, however, the involvement of Iran has not been confirmed yet by official UN sources, and since shouldn't be referred to by us. However, it's pretty likely that this Yemen civil war is also about hegemony in the Middle East, but it is not upon us to enforce it. And just China wants to remind all countries on the table to set aside biases and personal conflicts and find a solution that fits best the Yemeni civilization, the Yemeni people, and not their own political interests. All countries should be reminded to enforce all the sanctions that has been already agreed on already, which is the UNVIM and the arms embargo, but also all asset freeze. And tomorrow, China suggests to work further on that really establish this special body where we can agree on the smallest denominator we can agree on, and also what are the points we are willing to give up, what are cities that we can't give up on, what are points we can negotiate with Houthi rebels, with with the current government. So if everybody brings in his points and his or her points for negotiating, we can finish this tomorrow. Thank you.
That being all the speakers for today, and the time being exact 6, perfect timing. This committee will be over. I will count the votes just so that you can prepare for tomorrow in case regardless of what happens. So. Is there anyone who didn't vote yet and would like to have it now? I mean, I'm just saying, there is. Not really. So with unanimous voting, it is now static. Just kidding. It is now dynamic. Yeah, so it is now dynamic, which means that for now, I will tell you when the situation is developed. You don't have to develop it yourself. You don't have to come to tomorrow with a 12-page manifesto on how we can retake ties from whatever, right? So I will tell you this, what you can prepare, for example, and this is actually something that I do welcome from a friend, given that he now opened the proposition of comparatism, is that press releases will be in order in the name of ambassadors, and I could potentially give you a reaction from one of the parties to the press release. So you made it, France, for example, made a press release saying that publicly that the road to separatism may be the road to peace, and you elaborate the relative. I don't expect a novel, but I do expect maybe a paragraph. That would be nice. Then I could, for instance, assume that it's been publicized, and then in an hour to say if there was a response. I could also, if you send me a note with a plan, and this doesn't have to be public, you can just tell me, hey, we would like to suggest to the House please that a condition for this would be that, and you elaborate the strategy. I mean, I don't just want you to say, hey, I trade you out of the data for dice. Yes or no? That's probably not what I want. But if you properly suggest something, if you develop it relatively cleverly, it's critical thinking, then I mean, it doesn't have to be draft for solution, and I can just be a piece of paper with one paragraph, but then I could also see that happen, okay? Yeah?
Should still be our main go to
Yeah.
one resolution at the end, or just several smaller documents?
That is what I don't talk about now. It's that the main goal of the committee is still that big one draft resolution, right? That should still be your main goal. All of these other things are complementary. So either it's a crisis that I introduce, and then you break from the law committee to solve it, and you go back to the law committee, or you do these actions unilaterally, bilaterally, multilaterally, and these actions contribute to the formation of the resolution. So if you're talking about how we can ensure a peace talks, and you manage to propose something that both parties agree to, then you can, of course, in the resolution include, given that both parties have agreed to peace talks, can happen now. If, however, there is no proposition and the House is not accepting peace talks, then what you can do is write your proposition to the House in the draft resolution. Right? That's kind of the main difference. Yeah, I hope it's a bit enjoyable. I hope that you realize that you don't have to be, it's not a crisis committee, right? You don't have to be writing crises all the time. You don't have to be sending secret agents to Sana to start to kill Saudi or whatever. That's not what I mean by dynamic. I'm not trying to create a crisis committee. You're not going to be leading military fronts, as fun as that would be. This is just a way for you to reshape a bit the geopolitics in Yemen to break the stalemate. I mean, it hasn't been broken in the next country at war for many years, so this is giving you the possibility to like change that. Otherwise, any agreement will not go beyond what's been done by the UN already. Yeah. So if that is clear, I don't want to stop anybody else from being here longer than they have to. So if you have any questions or if you want any comment on the feedback, I will stay here another 10 minutes. Otherwise, you're free to go, and I will see you at 8 p.m. I don't know where it is, but I'm pretty sure there will be volunteers at that hotel. We'll take it there.
The concert will start at 7 p.m.
7?
Yes.
then you should all go now and change.